And again, for now, this is just us. All right, everybody, just another video cast of what we more often than not call the Dawn Patrol. It's a little bit more like the Dusk Patrol when I do it at night, the occasional night video cast here. I've got with me Kevin Williamson. He's a war game SME, as we call it, SME, at Marine Corps University. It's in Quantico, right, Virginia?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. His prior service was in the Army as a logistician. Say that 10 times fast. And the Naval Reserve as a gunner's mate. So that's an impressive background. Why don't we start with that? How did you end up here? How did you end up at the MCU in this role in particular?
So it was actually after I got out of the Navy Reserves. I was working a civilian logistics job, where essentially I traveled around the country, different school districts, take their refurbished books, give them to like kids in need type of organization. So I did that for the summer, and then they laid me off, and I had been in the Matrix Slytherin kind of wargaming community for a while, and a friend had pinged me online and sent me a job listing for a wargaming SME at Marine Corps University through Matrix, and said I should apply for it. So I did. Company has been nothing but, honestly, probably the best company I've worked for. I told them, pretty much my situation during COVID, during the interviews, and they took a chance on me. I don't have any formal education. I don't have any, wargaming certifications yet or anything like that.
Right, but you had your own hobbyist background.
Yeah, I had been doing it for a while. I was very vocal in the community. I did some volunteer work for UK Fight Club for about 2 years prior to this.
Okay.
So I was very familiar with some of the pro software already, like Combat Mission Pro.
Right.
Things like that.
Without getting too deep into it, can you explain maybe what the difference, just at whatever level you want to explain it, like what are the main differences with the pro and the commercial version? Just mostly feature set then?
Yeah, so it's mostly feature set with most of the pro versus commercial side of things. So for Combat Mission Pro, the main difference is it's not really like any new units or models. There are some of that. There are some different munition types, but the main differences would be like it has data analysis export. So for every scenario at the end, it'll generate CSV files of all the data from, weapon in game, things like that. It's got a replay feature that only works if you play it in turn-based mode. So essentially what it does is it auto saves all the turns, and then at the end compiles it into a replay file.
Interesting. And without getting into particulars is fine. But for specific, US or allies, do you also do customize? I'm assuming there's customize this and that. We can leave it at that. But
so there's a feature. I actually got familiar with it before I came on to the company, but it's essentially an Orbat editor. It's very basic. It opens up in Notepad essentially, and you go in there, and each soldier, each weapon, each vehicle all has its own custom ID. So you just go in there, you kind of learn what is what. There's some tables that kind of tell you what all the item classes are, and then through repetition, it probably takes 30 minutes to an hour of trial and error before you get the hang of it. And then you can make your own formations. Like I made just for fun, I made a light infantry unit with javelins and civilian vehicles, just to test like mobility type stuff. But you could do that. We've had people, I can't remember the specific article, but there's a gentleman in the UK Armed Forces who used it to basically change the way their recce company was doing their stuff. So, yeah. It's mainly just feature sets, things that the commercial community doesn't necessarily even need. Like it would be cool to have, but it's not really needed.
Overkill, really. ultimately, right?
It's more like analysis type stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So input and output. It's more of a, you have a lot more control over the database, and then you have more control on how it outputs the data from the modeling and simulation that's included.
Yeah.
So a very similar model then to like command and modern operations. So,
yeah, command's pretty much the same way. There's a misconception, I would say, in the commercial community that command has access to like a classified database.
Right. That's what I was getting at. Is probably maybe the person that's editing it might, right? But
exactly. Yeah.
right.
It's always there's like a curtain, from the outside looking in, where people think because it's professional, it's got all this secret stuff, but it really just has all the data analysis features. So these organizations, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean that too, but yeah, it really just has the stuff that gives.
Again, if I traipse into something you can't talk about, but
Sure.
There was rumor that they would get more almost into a SaaS offering, right? Like almost like a software as a solution offering. There's been kind of like just general talk of that, like more of an API type based, like,
talking about
like
with command.
Basically, yeah, just both. I've heard this more on the command side. I don't know if combat mission is thinking like.
Yeah, so there's a lead developer on command who we don't, as a company and as a development team, because they're separate from what I do, so I'm trying not to speak for them.
Yeah.
But right now they're exploring if it's even viable. They would like to ideally use like a language model. Doesn't have to be ChatGPT, but just as an example, create like an API to help the user experience, so that people aren't clicking through like 10 menus. They can just tell it what they want it to do, and then it does the inputs for them.
You just got me thinking.
Yeah, that's the idea, but they don't know if that's even something they're going to actually explore. They're still looking at it.
Yeah, we've been using it at work for. I'm in engineering. I'm in development and engineering, IT engineering, software engineering. So yeah, we use it all the time, and it's just, I was just thinking, kind of making even the scripting capabilities interactive. That would be wonderful.
Yeah,
like make it just user friendly, like more approachable. Because
that's the biggest challenge I hear from the dev team is they know command is not user friendly. Just like take all the mechanics aside from it, just figuring out the menus.
Right, like but from what I've seen of ChatGPT's capability, it's pretty damn capable of kind of conversing about X.
Yeah,
and especially
it's got a little bit older documentation. Like one of the first things we were exploring is basically using it to create Python scripts for us to then condense the CSV data to get ChatGPT's token limit, within the realm, and have it kind of crunch it and all that.
Yeah.
And that was, I would say, pretty successful. Like, it's not perfect. You're going to have to tweak your prompts a little bit and refine it, and eventually it'll give you one that works. So I know it's capable. I just, your background and their background is out of my league.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I'll steer away. So that's interesting. I didn't realize, first of all, I didn't realize you kind of had steered towards MCU kind of more from the professional side. So with Matrix in particular. So that was is your position with Matrix, or is it with the USMC?
Yeah, so that's also kind of it's a weird one too. So because Matrix Slytherin is a UK company, they had to find a US contract vehicle to get people at MCU. Okay. So technically I work for Matrix and they subcontract me out to MCU through KBR.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have like two supervisors, but so I report to Matrix, but then I also report to Mr. Barrick, but they're really good on making sure there's not like conflict of interest or one's telling me something different than the other. So it's a little weird when it comes to like having to write two AARs or, two separate ideas of how to do things depending on the organizations, but it works out pretty well.
So what was, as you first started at the MCU, like what was your first directive? What was your first primary goal?
So Mr. Barrick is a very ambitious person to work for, so there was a bunch of different tasks, but the main ticket items were we did a exercise with Expeditionary Warfare School as soon as I got there called Dominion Advance using Flashpoint campaigns. So pretty much as soon as I got there, I already knew the game. Mr. Barrick had made the scenario, so I was pretty much walking around to the different student groups, making sure they're doing okay. They don't need any help. They were all pretty proficient with the game at the time, so it was really
Okay.
just facilitating something that was already in motion. And then
Well,
also
did
the war
you?
game. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Continue. I think you were just about to go into what I was about to ask
Yeah,
you.
I was gonna say the Wargaming Cloud had
Yep,
also just
okay.
gotten stood up, so I was responsible for getting access, troubleshooting it, making sure all the games were working properly in single player and multiplayer. Just
Is
a
that?
bunch of QA type stuff.
Yeah. Without getting into anything technical, you shouldn't get into. But I mean, is it ultimately like the MCU's version of a Steam app? I mean, is it basically a streaming service of itself, or I mean?
So it uses the Azure virtual cloud environment that Microsoft has.
Yep.
But it was specifically designed for MCU, so they like to call it the Marine Corps Wargaming Cloud. Um, but essentially, what it is it works like any other virtual environment. So
Right.
you can either access it through a URL in your browser,
Right.
uh, which all of our students have .edu accounts. So it's kind of
Oh,
synced
so
with
you're
the
actually
academic. Yeah. So it's
interesting. So
kind of
you're
like
actually
that.
okay.
Yeah, so they can
I
do that, or they can have like the remote desktop app. So
right.
people
Right.
are connecting through their tablets and
So
iPads
it's
and things
very
like that.
it's almost similar to what Sony was offering with like remote gaming. Like you're basically running that
Yeah,
underneath
it's
you.
it's basically like Stadia or any other kind of
Yeah.
streaming
Mhm.
gaming platform people have
That's
heard of.
cool.
Yeah, it's a really awesome. Honestly, it's a really awesome capability. Like it's the the shock factor's kind of worn off on me, but I still understand. Like it's the only instance of like a distributed learning
Right.
gaming platform that I've ever heard of.
Right.
So I was using it when I
Um.
went to England for DSET. I was actually logging into the cloud that was at Quantico in England at DSET, showing like, some of the UK people, the capability and all that. So you can really log in from anywhere.
So interesting. Even as an instructor or an umpire or a
Yep.
table umpire, whatever you're gonna call it, you can actually kind of drop in and help kind of see what they're seeing and help them out a little
Yep.
bit remotely. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So
All right.
there's actually it's more of a tool than a game, but it's called ITDG, Interactive Tactical Decision Game.
Mhm.
But that's actually coming into the cloud, and that's exactly what you just described. You start up a server, it pulls from a kind of like VBS4's terrain server, like a streaming SAN table. You set up
Mhm.
whatever TDG you want to in real time as the umpire. The
Oh
clients
wow.
connect. Yeah, and it's not just one session either. All the clients have their individual sessions. So if you want, you can have 8 people in one TDG variation, then change it for the other 8, then change it for another 8, and you can watch it all in real time, pause it, make things happen. Um, so yeah, it's a really cool capability. There just hasn't
That's
been
really
as
good.
much exposure to it, I think. So.
What are the main roadblocks or pain points for it? Getting enough people to administer it, or in that way we just talked about, or
I think it's
under.
culture and time, honestly.
Okay.
So that would be my biggest one. Like, I've never had an issue sitting down with a faculty member and explaining to them what a game is and what it can do for them, depending on what we're doing. The problem is getting them to think proactively that I have this capability and I have these things that I can use instead of doing your curriculum and then having the SME tell you, well, we can incorporate this X, Y, and Z. We would like to educate the faculty altogether, which is the plan this year, to try to change that culture, get them excited about this capability, and then just get it in their minds at the start of the year, as they go forward. So that's the first one is culture, and then the second one is time, which I don't really think you can change. That's kind of like an
Right.
organizational thing. I'm never going to tell faculty member, like, no, you need to give me 2 weeks for this war game. Like that's just something that's always going to be a roadblock, I think.
How often do you get to be physically at the center there, and do you work right out of the Krulak Center? Is that what it is? Is that
Yeah, so my job's like 99% remote. I only show up for the events mandatory. However, I do like to go in like 2 or 3 times a week, show my face, and just kind of get out of telework.
Yeah.
Like it's nice, but I also like seeing the people I work with.
Yeah.
And yeah, we don't work in the Krulak Center, but we have a wargaming like department office that's literally like 20 feet from it. So it's the same building.
So are you working primarily on the computerized offerings, or do you get involved in any of the other wargaming
Yeah, so
meetings?
we have plans this year to use tabletop for like our Fight Club extracurricular organization. There are some schools that use tabletop. Like I know School of Advanced Warfighting just did OWS, I think 2 or 3 months ago. However, when it comes to manual wargaming, usually the professors are already proficient with that game, so they usually administer it. They'll contact Mr. Barrick if they need actual like war game SME support. So like if they decide they want to use command, they'll call us in.
OWS is the operational warfare system. That's the one that's
Yeah.
the core rules for like Assassin's Mace. And,
Yes, sir.
and
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I've always wanted to play that, but eventually I will.
I've got the I've actually got the rule book right here.
Oh man, don't even tempt me. All right, I know it's not classified or anything, but I
no,
do.
yeah,
but
I am. He has given me permission in Fight Club to run a game of Assassin's Mace through Vassal, but that's I have to find time, and he has to find time. But whenever that does happen, I'll hit you up and let you know.
Oh my gosh, that's my bucket list. That's one of them.
Yeah, I'm all about trying to bring. Like my philosophy is like I'm relatively young. I'm 28, and I know a bunch of people my age or younger that do this for fun. So I'm all about if it's not classified, there's the worst they could say is no. So I'm just trying to bring everything I can to everybody.
Oh, I absolutely love that. Yeah, it looks so good. It looks so well done. I saw some of his. I'm pretty sure it's the same individual. He was presenting it for the Georgetown University Wargaming Club Society, and so I think they played it this weekend. But
yeah, they did. I've seen it on Twitter.
Yeah. So back to what was the primary? I mean, I can probably guess, but I don't know if there's other reasons too. I mean, what was the main thrust of the wargaming cloud? What were the difficulties that were being overcome? Like what was the original ask, and do you feel like it ended up being better than intended, or beyond the original mandate, or
yeah? So what was told to us when we first got there was, as far as the wargaming cloud goes, there wasn't any like metrics to go off of as far as like we want X amount of people logged in for this many hours. They just kind of wanted to see what the engagement was going to be. So we ran a bunch of, I would say most of our use of the cloud for last academic year was actually for Fight Club stuff. And that was for like 2 reasons. One, we really wanted to create a culture of like competitive wargaming that can also be educational. And then the second one was we also kind of wanted to troubleshoot the cloud and see if there are any connection issues and things. So we had a couple.
There's a lot to say for excitement, getting and the getting people head to head on something.
Yep.
The bragging factor goes a long way. So yes.
So most of our events we called it the Triple Crown. We used 3 different war games spread out over like 6 or 7 months, and we had like different tracks you could go down. You could either have a 4-person team, or you could compete as an individual. So we had leaderboards for both. So there was a bunch of emails back and forth between people, impromptu AARs, teammates. That was the reason why we wanted to do a team-based tournament, was to get people on a team. If we had a Italian Marine Corps team versus a Krulak Center team, I do know for a fact that all the people in the Krulak Center were looking at their own individual games together, talking about strategy and things like that. So that's kind of, yes, we're playing for fun, but we're trying to do things within that organization to still keep it educational without them
Do
having
you
to see it that way.
do you ever take these core games and amplify them with a logistical structure, or even unit and subunit, like command and subcommand issues, the creature field
So
problems of that?
we did not last academic year,
Okay,
and
because
a
that's
lot of it has to do with time as well. So we found that people would sign up for a tournament, um, and they would like forget that it was their turn, or things of
are
that nature.
you finding this generally accepted and kind of reaching an ebb and flow with the junior officers, NCOs, or do you feel like this initiative in general? I think it was generally just based on like the commandant's original initiative from 2019. It sounded like it sounded like the Marine Corps wanted to at least try to kind of
Like top
bring
down.
bring it down, bring it
Yeah.
down and spread it out. Is
So
what I
I'll
got.
say that because of where I work, most of everybody we deal with is captain and above.
Sure.
But for our tournaments, I would say it's a healthy mix. So people not doing their turns are like an exception. For the most part, I'd say 85% will get everybody from a
And
captain all the way up to, a retired lieutenant colonel.
primarily only individuals that have a direct relationship with the MCU, or are you spreading out as well?
So for right now, it is just because we're still proving it as a capability. The end state
Okay.
would be like a Marine Corps wide.
Right.
If you've got somebody at 29 Palms that wants to log in, that is the end state, to allow any Marine anywhere to log in. But right now, it's just for MCU, as we're still kind of,
Right. I
putting
mean,
the games in and working through it.
is there a vision for this to be almost drag and drop? I mean, for using Azure in particular, it's a very expandable format. Like, is there any thoughts of this moving to like another learning center, or even some of the technology going to another service?
So that I'm actually not sure of. I do
Okay.
know that we're still doing like some configurations with the VMs themselves, as far as like how many are dedicated to a game, depending on, the resources. But
Mhm. Are you
just from my understanding, I think we would be with Microsoft for a long time.
right? As far as I can tell, like Leavenworth for the Army is obviously prolifically involved with wargaming. They've kept the flame going pretty well, but I don't necessarily know if in a systematic way like this. So it's interesting. Do you have any competitors, inter-service competitors, if you will, right? As far as like, or do you even?
I don't think so. Like the closest one that I would say would be the Army's CGSC.
Okay.
Or even like West Point, because I know West Point's using combat mission a lot. But as
Yeah.
far as like a holistic approach to wargaming as a whole and a culture shift, I don't think that anybody else is trying to do that. Like I've even, just out of my way, not as a directive because I'm passionate about it, I've even approached a gunnery sergeant at CME, the School for Enlisted. It's the Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy at MCU. It's eluding me right now, but
Right.
I've even approached them about, hey, we have this capability. Showed them the Wargaming Cloud. They're super excited about it. They weren't exposed to it. But the problem is they don't have the hardware to use it. They don't have all
Right.
the computers and things like that.
Right. Well, that's the thing. You don't need
Yeah.
right. If it's Azure, it's just
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
so that's kind of the road that we're going down. I have to reach back out to them, but I started translating some like MCA Gazette TDGs into some of the games in the cloud
I
to use at their like Warfighting Society events where they do TDGs. But instead of like using a whiteboard and discussing it, there's no
right.
reason that I can't puckster some COAs for them in real time.
Uh,
So like there's some things I want to do, but again, the roadblock is time. And then everybody else also has to be on board and their time has to line up. But there's a lot of ways that we can use this that haven't been tapped into yet. So
okay. So we've touched upon a little bit the use of war plan, flashpoint campaigns, and I'm sorry, something happened behind me.
yeah,
Combat mission, right? That's in use as well. Any other games that are kind of in the works, or?
So we are going to transition. Right now, we've got Flashpoint Red Storm in the cloud, but we are going to transition to Flashpoint Pro, which uses the new Southern Storm engine,
Right.
but also has all those pro features we talked about that are pretty much the same across the board as like combat mission and command. Data analysis. Flashpoint Pro is really just like it's a more modernized contemporary setting than a Cold War gone hot. So that's why it's more applicable to MCU's use. But we use command. Sorry, go ahead.
No, oh, yeah. One of the reasons I was kind of asking about like inter-service was whether or not there's like potential multi-domain, wargaming capability foreseen in the future. And I mean, for obvious reasons, based on its scope, I mean, command moderating operations is probably about as good as you're going to get with that. But what about other board games, like of course Littoral Commander, which we're both aware of, and is there anything else out there? There's a really good or Urban Warfare is great. There's a lot of near modern war games that are We Are Coming Nineveh is another one that's really good.
So a lot of our tabletop stuff would probably be more Fight Club oriented. Okay. Just because the schools themselves, if they want to use a board game, they don't really come to like me for that or my colleague. We're more on the digital side, but me and my colleague, we love Littoral Commander. We both like OWS. Like we do like, tabletop gaming too, but as far as being able to fit that into, it's just easier for a 2-day war game exercise to use the cloud, and use this game and have all the students kind of just give us their plans. But as far as like, multiple allies and partners, the Command Professional Edition inside of the Fight Club organization we have, I'm responsible for that. We call it an elective right now, but what we wanted to do was have games like Flashpoint Campaigns and Command Professional Edition that require, more than just a day to learn it, essentially have a dedicated path for these students to, hey, I want to, play Command Professional Edition all year. So the plan is to slowly work them up. We'll do like air warfare for a month or two, naval for a month or two. And then by the end of it, I've set it up to kind of give us practice for CSC's capstone exercise where, the last couple of months of playing Command Pro, it's going to be a cooperative multiplayer event that the students will actually play together in their own subcomponents against me, who's essentially puckstering red. And that's just for facilitation purposes because it's easier to do 1v6 than 6v6 and then an umpire. But yeah, so there are plans to kind of do that. Last year was just a really good year for us. Pretty much anything that could go wrong did go wrong. So now that we've got the cloud stable, we want to start transitioning into those bigger, more complex ideas.
So how do you see this possibly even working with ROTC programs, NAVAR and ROTC and ROTC, or even other ROTCs? I mean, how has there been any talk about expanding to the university level in some way?
Yeah, so Mr. Barrick's been pretty adamant about it. Costs us money every time we add an account to the Wargaming cloud, so we have to be a little careful about just giving anybody access, but we do want to give access to, those academic organizations like West Point or ROTC, VMI, anybody who's, somewhere in an academic setting. We want to give them access to the cloud. There has been talks of doing like, an MCU team versus a VMI team or something like that.
Yeah.
His biggest vision for wargaming in the future is kind of like a Olympic sport type thing where every
Mhm.
school has its wargaming team and they compete.
Mhm.
It's a really good idea and we're all behind it. It just comes back to those two roadblocks, which is culture and time, which I think the time will sort itself out if you can change the culture. So we just need people to kind of get excited, which is where we're trying to go with Fight Club. Give it a little bit more production value, give them PDF packages of like whatever campaign they're fighting. Keep it in a game setting, and then once they're already immersed and engaged, then kind of reach out to these schools and be like, hey, we're doing a war plan. So like for our war plan tournament, that's what we actually did was we're like, okay, if we're going to play Operation Bagration or Barbarossa,
Mhm.
and it's a good operational art learning opportunity, we'll just reach out to like Australian, War College and all these other NATO allies and partners who set up their teams. And then we have our teams. And then we all just kind of fought out a World
Mhm.
War II style
Do
scenario
you
over a month
ever?
or two.
We kind of hinted at this before, but do you ever make it like more of a 3 or 4-on-4 cooperative where you actually do some like
So
preparatory uh,
we would like to
operation
do
management?
that. However, the challenge with the Wargaming Cloud is, well, it's really the games we pick. The games that are in there, like Flashpoint campaigns, it doesn't have like a 2v2, 3v3
Right.
type.
Yeah. Hmm.
So the way that I've thought about kind of getting around that would be, like you mentioned, a Kriegspiel type game. So if I've got 5 people doing a Flashpoint campaigns battle, why can't I just make an operational level map for one player to do the Kriegspiel stuff, and then I'll make 4 separate scenarios for his battalions, you know? And so each player will fight a separate battalion scenario, and then depending on the outcomes of that, change the operational level map. So there's some ideas on how to make cooperative
Right. This
gameplay.
is this is what got me asking that. Actually, is the picture that was on here. Is that it looked like
Yeah, so
it looked like
that's
people were
Dominion
cooperating.
Advance. That's Dominion Advance. So that was a little bit less than 300 students, but they were split up into multiple groups. So you've got groups of 7 or 8 students right there, and you've
Right.
got one person. You can see that gentleman at the
The
laptop.
operator.
Yeah, he's basically operating the game, and everybody else is doing their plans. We do a lot of that, but as far as getting all the operators together and doing it in real time, it's a little bit more challenging.
What's interesting about Flashpoint campaigns is it does have the overlay
Hmm.
capabilities. I don't know if you messed with that. It's pretty cool stuff.
Hmm.
So you mentioned TDGs before, tactical decision games,
Yeah.
very much Kriegspiel in its format. I did find the original. There was one way back when Mastering Tactics back in '94, I think. It was the Marine Corps Gazette, and it's a brilliant PDF. I don't know if you've. I hope you. I'm pretty sure you've seen this, but let me see if I can get it.
I've thumbed through a lot of MCA
Yeah,
stuff.
hold on a second. Let me see if I can, that didn't work. I absolutely love this one. This is probably where the Gazette's got the idea to.
Yeah.
This is by Schmidt, Major Schmidt, and these are brilliant. It's basically the same format, but this is publicly available to everybody that's watching. I mean, it's out there. What I love about the TDG format is what it says at the very end of them is to, hold on a second, let me see if it mentions it, is the timing of it. I love, I don't know if it does it in the original book. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
See that? Oh, here we go. There you go. This is the brilliant part of it right here. Is to write in the frag order or even that.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's what I always try to do when I'm running a like a naval air Kriegspiel is to time limit it because you don't have days to figure out what you're gonna do. So yeah,
we do that a lot in our Like we used to use the operational art of war
Mm,
for school
mm,
advanced warfighting. We transition a war plan just because it's way easier to learn for people.
yeah.
But in those scenarios where we do have a head-to-head kind of, blue versus red, we do the timing because what I see a lot at MCU, and this is just my opinion, is a lot of the officers that are going through these schools to learn, they don't like to make decisions without all the information. And so when they're
Mm.
forced to make these decisions without all the information, that's when you can really see them, I wouldn't say panic, but kind of get stressed out and
You
a little
realize you're never gonna
nervous.
have all the information.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so we try to do that to the best of our ability. And I really prefer when we put the students in uncomfortable
Oh
situations,
yeah,
even if they're not
absolutely.
realistic, because it's about learning. It's not about
Right.
winning whatever scenario you're fighting. So
And what I found interesting is it doesn't. I mean, obviously, modern or near modern wargaming helps to a degree because of the equipment used and so forth. Just kind of getting used to your natural environment, if you will. But I've also
yeah.
found that even historical, even pulling them out, and I think that was even mentioned in one of the proceedings article about MCUs that sometimes you do like Wings of Glory, and
Yeah.
you've already mentioned World War II. I mean, where you just kind of you really break it down more into the fundamentals of combat and
Yeah.
precise ordering,
So we
concise
did
ordering.
we did an exercise Gothic Wildcat for Saw. And it was just a World War II operational art of war force scenario about the Gothic line during World War II. And it was just because they did a case study on it. They read a bunch of information about the battle. And so we just made a scenario and essentially said, okay, your allies, your Axis, now fight it out. Because it's one thing to read about the
Yeah.
situation, and it's another thing to visually see. Yeah, it actually does make sense that, through the winter and the crappy weather, like I wouldn't have been able to reach this line like I thought I would have,
Hmm.
or yeah, there's a perfect scheme of maneuver over here, so let's just flood it out completely to deny them.
Hmm.
Like these are things that they're able to visually understand as opposed to
Hmm.
just reading numbers on a sheet of paper. So,
Yeah, I think when you take the players out of the current time frame, you can accentuate the environment. I think more,
mhm,
and just other aspects than what they're used to. So, and then kind of
yeah,
just make it like that. That's cool. That's cool.
that's the main selling point for Command Professional Edition. Um, is it's less about, like, yes, it's nice. It's got a customizable database and it has all the
Right.
bells and whistles, but its main strength is actually teaching the students what the weapon systems and munitions and sensor ranges are and everything that they might encounter, down the line when they actually go into an operational status, because you have all sorts of different billets. You've got Marine infantry officers, you've got aviators, you've got logisticians, you've got all these different billets. Not everybody's going to know the range of this ballistic missile or this air-to-air missile. So we try to educate them through the capabilities in Command Pro. That's really its main selling point for us.
Honestly, I think Littoral Commander does that pretty darn well too.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
yeah, um, you had mentioned before you do have a system on the cloud that is more TDG, more kind of base setup. Is that a third party? You mentioned the name of it. Is
Yeah,
it an
I don't
internal
know
system?
if they're still developing it, if it's like switched hands, but it used to be called ITDG, Interactive
Okay.
Tactical Decision Game, and
Okay.
it was actually by ONR, Office of Naval Research.
Okay.
But
Good.
I don't know if they're still making it or if it's transitioned hands. Because every time that I've tried to, like, I have the application, I have access to it, and I've got the
Right.
documentation, but when I Google it, nothing comes up.
It's probably
So
written in COBOL or yeah. That's right.
yeah,
So,
so
but,
I have no idea. I actually haven't met anybody who's working on it. They just kind
yeah.
of told us we had this thing, so I checked it out.
So what's up next for you personally? Any new mandates being given for this
Uh,
year?
yeah, we just got our July task list, which has about
Okay.
20 things on it, but that's just because we're ramping up to the academic year. So
Right.
on the 17th, I have to go give like the new faculty in brief, which is where we'll tell them, hey, we have the Wargaming cloud and here's what the games are. And that's kind of like our first impression to the new faculty. So I'm
Right.
really preparing for that to try to get them in
Interesting.
the right mindset.
Right.
And then after that, it's just like, beta testing some of the War Plan Pacific scenarios we have and just getting everything set up that way as soon as
So
the first
would
war
a
game
faculty
event happens.
would a faculty member just kind of present a problem and then ask y'all to solve it with a word, like bring to the
So it depends. So like Command Staff College, when they did their capstone exercise, what they do is like we'll come to them and we'll say, what's the learning objectives? Because that's the easiest. So if they're like, we want to focus on kinetics or logistics or whatever, and then we'll say, okay, well, what's like the force laydown? And they'll just give us they'll either give us the actual like battle books, or they'll just give us like a vague like we trust you, and then we'll set up a meeting to review everything, and might make some tweaks, but it's essentially like
do
learning objectives, adversary, what's the location.
do any of the pro versions of what we've been talking about, do they have like extended modules specific to logistics? Because I think that most games kind of that's like the first thing to go in design, right?
Yeah, I wish Combat Mission had some, honestly. I think it really needs some logistics, uh, but the games don't. Like Command Pro just uses Cargo 2.0 that the commercial community has, access to. Flashpoint Campaigns just uses the same model that Southern Storm
Right.
does. Um, yeah, there's no new logistics. If we wanted to incorporate logistics in a scenario where when it happened, that would be where like I come in and I think of a creative way to do it, either through
Right. Right.
scripting
Just at
or
a scenario level. Right.
yeah, like they wanted logistics in the capstone event, but we already had
Right.
like 1,500 units in the
Uh,
scenario, and
right.
yeah, so what we opted for was we just made it like log nodes, and then if the log nodes got hit or contested or something like that, we had a
Right.
script that would activate that would
Right.
change
If you
something.
have some sort of
So
line of
yeah,
like
so a lot of that
oh,
gets kind of, I wouldn't say white celled because there is like an actual
yeah,
legitimate
sure.
effect, but yeah,
Right. Yeah,
does
just
kind
like
of be have to outside the box a little bit.
really depends on the scope and honestly probably the time
Yeah,
frame.
and the good thing about the games, honestly, is like, and I know this is going to sound maybe a little bad, but it's just my philosophy is in order to keep the students engaged and immersed, sometimes you got to lie to them. Like they don't know what they don't know. So if you tell them, hey, logistics are modeled in the game, and if you don't protect this, then you're going to lose X
Yeah,
amount of
yeah.
fuel, then they think that's just how the game is.
Yeah,
So I always
yeah.
try to make sure we don't tell people the game doesn't do that, and try
Right.
to think of a creative way first. Because once they lose confidence in the game, then they stop, like, everything breaks down because it's not about the game. Then they're like, well, this isn't realistic. What am I learning from it? And it just becomes a whole nother set of problems.
um one of my last questions here. So how do the fight clubs relate to all this, and what is your like? When did you first become involved in that? And just how do you see that
Yes.
growing in the future, or
Yeah.
separate?
So MCU Fight Club. So everything's called a fight club, it seems, when it's wargaming and extracurricular.
Right,
And
right,
I'm involved in 3 different ones. So I'll just clarify what they are. UK Fight Club is related to US Fight Club. I did some volunteer work for Combat Mission Pro before I got hired. So that's kind of how I was involved in that. I'm not really as involved anymore. US Fight Club, I got involved with after meeting Colonel David at the Command User Conference last year. He was already aware of me from UK Fight Club. But after a face to face conversation, he I wouldn't say he gave me the reins, but I pretty much impromptu run it right now, especially while he's going to NATO. So that's kind of my side project. But MCU Fight Club is a work related organization that's extracurricular. And the vision for MCU Fight Club is eventually to be that intramural sports type competition where we
right.
have EWS, SAW, CSC, maybe like a cool Spartan shield at the end, that these schools would compete for a trophy, and every year the trophy might switch hands depending on what school won. Like we really want to go down that step towards like competitive sports environment for MCU
Yeah.
Fight Club. The problem with that is the students usually they pretty much roll out every year. You get a new batch of students. So
Right.
you got to
Do you,
start with the faculty first and then mold it from there. If we can get the
do you ever see
faculty
it?
to tell the students like, hey, we've got this thing that we're competing for at the end of the year. We need anybody who's interested, If we can get them to kind of push, then I think it'll.
Do you see it kind of actively looping back and kind of feeding the acceptance of wargaming more in the professional side? Like these individuals that are taking part in these extracurricular, are they that much more? Are you finding them that much more receptive of it in their professional side?
Yeah, so we actually had he's retiring now, so he's no longer with us, unfortunately. But we had a lieutenant colonel at Command Staff College, Lieutenant Colonel Downey. And he fell in love with this game we have called Order of Battle, which it plays very similar to like Panzer Corps, if you've ever played that.
Yeah, I know which.
Yeah, it's just a basic hex encounter, but
Yeah.
it's 3D models, and he loves it to the point where he was buying the DLC on his own at home.
Right.
And that individual, he actually logged the most hours in our Wargaming cloud out of everybody throughout the academic year. And so getting
Awesome.
people like him, like if he had stayed on another year,
Right.
he would have been the perfect individual to kind of help us mold, the students coming in and all this. So if we can get more people like Lieutenant Colonel Downey, have that effect on them where they really enjoy it, they feel like they are learning something, then yeah.
Do you see, is it primarily being used as capstones on wargaming courses, or is it being integrated as well in some of his more historical classes instead?
Yeah, so it's right now it's being integrated as a war game augmenting whatever it is they're studying. However, like Command Staff College's capstone doesn't have anything to do with what they're studying because it's a fictitious scenario. It's more about the joint war fighting, getting used to Plan X's and all that kinds of stuff at the major level. That's how they use it. But like SAW and EWS, EWS really uses it, I would say, for tactics and combined arms more than anything. SAW is where I see most of the war games for like historical educational use. Like they did a bunch of World War II war games before they took their trip to Southeast Asia and went and saw like Vietnam and all the battlefields and things like that. So they'll actually war game these battles, and then they'll go and take those trips to go see the battlefields themselves.
That's
so,
terrible. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd love to be
on
that.
How do I sneak in and take these classes?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually said that to my supervisor at Modern Day Marine. I was like, hindsight being 2020, I probably should have went in as an officer instead of enlisted because they get to do all these cool things. So.
Well, yeah, if I knew wargaming was a potential career 30 years ago, I can't.
Yeah.
So I think for now we'll leave it at that. I've very much enjoyed talking about this. I can talk about this forever.
Same.
Where do you see wargaming and the MCU in 5 years?
Well, if all goes to plan, at that point it would be pushed out to the wider Marine Corps at the time. And what I would really like to see happen is, this is just my personal opinion. So I think a lot of people give tabletop wargaming the value that it has because it's like people look at a board game and they see a bunch of counters on it and dice. They think that something really complex must be going on, like if they have no exposure to it. And while that's true, I think when people see a video game or a computer game, regardless of how realistic the model is, they still view it as a game instead of wargaming, when all it's doing is doing those calculations for you. So I think if we could shift the culture to where people don't see things like Flashpoint as a video game, but they see it as a tool to introduce command cycle friction, or order delay, or they don't see command as this overly complex sandbox, and they see it as a database of all this knowledge where, okay, if I know I'm deploying to this region, let me just open up the database and see what these weapon systems can do. I think if that culture gets shifted in 5 years, I think we'll see, actual
Do you,
individual units at the company level having their,
yeah,
yeah,
right.
teams.
But do you foresee a need in the change of interfacing in order to get to that stage in some way?
No, I think, honestly, I think I need another year before I can make that assessment, I think.
Okay.
Because
All
last
right.
academic year, I do feel like a lot of the lack of interest and exposure we had was due to us coming in like pretty much at the tail end of the academic year. And then trying to incorporate all of this wargaming, once the students are already 60, 70% of the way done. I think I really want to see what this next year looks like after doing the plan from the very beginning, before I can make that determination. But I don't think, I'll say this, nobody at MCU is like adamantly against wargaming that I've experienced. It's more so
Right.
just educating them on the tools and the games.
The use of it, just like any other tool. Right.
Yeah, it's they don't know what they don't know. It's not that they're adamant against it.
I'm really glad you mentioned this before, but the potential use of AI in wargaming
Hmm.
could be very interesting. All right. We just
Yeah, I
opened
mean,
up.
I'm doing some research on that, which I'm trying to finish in the next week or so. There's a language model that I've been testing, should be released here pretty soon, but it's made specifically for DoD applications. So it could be used in secured environment and all that. But what I
Mhm.
really like about it is it doesn't just give you the answers, it gives you the sources, and it also gives you a hyperlink to go cross-reference. So the
Oh,
information you're
that's nice.
getting is true. But what
Right.
I've been able to do is set up a very basic scenario in command, tell it the platforms I have, tell it the target, tell it to create a strike package, and it'll list it in ATO format.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
it'll do
Yeah.
all that. And so the reason I want to see if that's viable is because when we have these exercises where we've got a Marine officer who doesn't know anything about air, and now all of a
You,
sudden they're
you just
told they're in charge of the air campaign. I
right.
want to have a tool that
Yeah.
they can use, because then it's not them trying to learn the game, it's them being educated about the use of whatever assets they have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Like
Yep.
take the mouse out of the equation in some regards, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of getting at from an interface perspective.
Yeah.
Uh, it's kind of it is a jump to even get them to the board, and to even
Yeah.
roll the dice. Even it seems so fundamental for people who actually gamed for decades or
Yeah,
whatever.
like some of the
But
students we trained on command were very, like, we had one that was like, I don't ever touch my computer except to open emails. And
right,
trying to
but he
teach him how to go from only
right,
emails to a game is,
right, and air
yeah.
tasking in that game is not particularly intuitive at all.
Yeah, no.
But
So I see it as the new BlackBerry essentially. It's like everybody's
yeah,
personal
yeah,
assistant.
just something where, especially even on the scripting side, I want a task force of blank, blank, blank to show up at blank,
Yeah.
and just have them let it do its thing, and just hey, I want a
It
robot, dude.
also has some nice like XCon features too that we could have used. So instead of like generating all these products for them, like you could tell it to create fake social media injects, and it'll create fake Facebook post images that look real for
Oh,
whatever
cool.
the XCon use is, put it in a PowerPoint, export it to you.
Oh,
And like there
wow.
you go. There's your like, your social media deception plan or whatever, in
Wow.
five
Okay.
seconds. So
Cool. Very cool.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for
Yes, sir.
talking about this subject. We'll have to do it again at some point here, and maybe as a couple other new games come out, we can kind of assess their usefulness for the MCU and beyond.
Yeah, sure. To be honest, I'm always on Steam looking at, is there anything out there that we could use?
Oh yeah, there's a few coming down the pipeline.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I
All right.
appreciate you having
Cool.
me, sir.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much for taking part.
Yes, sir. You have a good one.